What if you couldn't make movies? I said, I'd have to find a way that I could. What if movies didn't exist? I'd have to invent them.
This is Brad Bird, the longtime animation creator of such classics as The Iron Giant and The Incredibles. And here, he's receiving an Oscar for the outstanding animation of his third collaboration with Pixar, a studio with plenty of experience in pushing the boundaries of animation. Over the years, they've animated toys, monsters, fish, superheroes, even cars.
Ka-chow!
But when Bird approached the studio with the idea for his next film,
it's French, it's food, and it's got rat in it.
They suddenly realized they had to do something they'd never done before. They had to make
food.
Food.
But they couldn't simply make it recognizable as food, they also had to make it look good. Because in Ratatouille, the film we'll be discussing today, food is almost a character in itself.
Everybody was panicked about what CG food was going to look like because it could either look really bad, you know.
That's the voice of Sharon Callahan, cinematographer of such classics as Monsters, Inc. and Finding Nemo. And to better understand what she means, we have to go back in time a bit. The year is 1995, and a newly formed animation studio named Pixar just changed animation forever with their fully computer animated film, Toy Story.
You are a toy!
Fast forward to 2004, where the studio was not only focusing on human characters for the first time, but for one scene in particular, they also had to create CG food. And where it fit well within the rest of The Incredibles, the studio knew the level of detail would have to improve in order to keep up with the rapidly evolving landscape of 3D animation. See, in traditional 2D animation style, characters and objects that are going to move or be interacted with had a lot less detail. They were typically identified by flat colors and simple one-tone shading. This meant that the food in these films could remain simple, but still perfectly fit within the animation style.
Look, you get porridge, and it's happy to see you.
But within Pixar's revolutionary CG style, where objects have texture, translucency, rich shadows, and colors, simple, flat food wouldn't work.
What is good? What is bad? What is mediocre?
But rather than scrap the film, Brad Bird challenged the animation team to redefine how food was animated.
This sucks. This is why. And here's how I would solve it.
Enter Sharon Callahan.
Nobody had ever seen good CG food, so we spent a lot of time really analyzing food and trying to figure out what made it look appealing, how to stylize it.
So essentially, Sharon and the team had to better understand what good-looking food, well, looked like. And since gourmet food isn't readily available on an animator's desk, she decided to utilize a medium she was all too familiar with.
With the food in Ratatouille, it's like I spent a lot of time looking at good food photography and bad food photography.
And one of the biggest things she noticed was that food photography lives and dies in the shadows.
Mostly I wanted to try to make the food look juicy and rich in color, especially in the darks, because food doesn't have any blacks or grays in it. And it's the opposite of what the computer wants to do, so we had to develop some new techniques to try to get that lush color into the shadows.
And to better understand what this would look like, the team began analyzing live-action films to observe how cinematographers held subtle color within the shadows.
Got the wrong guy, pal.
This is why in most scenes you see darker versions of colors as opposed to absolute blacks. But they didn't want to give the food its own specific lighting. They wanted the entire film to share that look.
But I also didn't want to light the food separately from everything else, so I used it as a look for the entire film, especially for the skin tones, but also the sets and everything. I really wanted it to have a juicy look in the low end.
Voila! The best restaurant, get first pick.
So the team had a basic understanding of what the food should look like, but now they had to actually get into the computer and stylize it to match the rest of the film. See, they didn't want to recreate reality. They wanted to create something that was not only believable, but also something that feels like your best memory. You don't want the texture to be too realistic, you want it to be softened and romanced a bit, which can help create a more visceral reaction from the viewer. Take the bread, for instance.
Well, the bread was really tricky because it glows, you know, it has so much translucency to it, and trying to get that was very difficult.
Listen, Oh, symphony of crackle.
People know the pattern of the holes in the bread, you know, so we had to really look at how it would be if you're rolling the loaf a particular way and make sure that you get that nice swirl pattern and the uneven hole size and stuff.
This was the direction that Sharon knew the film needed to pursue, but none of it would matter if she couldn't convince the producers that it was even possible. So she tapped into her experience as a painter and decided to demonstrate it herself.
She projected some of her inspirational images that were photographs, and then she projected them alongside her digitally created, her lit images.
And the outcome?
There was certainly a difference in that one is a photograph and one is the interpretation, but it was so appealing, and it really, again, caricatured the real photograph and brought out those elements that said, wow, that looks succulent, that looks edible. And it just had this glow and this translucency, and it just looked edible.
Right, but perhaps even more importantly,
it didn't look plastic, you know, like what you would imagine CG food to be like. And so at that moment, we can make this film.
Of course, the team didn't just want the food to look good, they wanted its creation to be convincing. And that meant fully understanding the setting it took place in. On one end, you have the dining room, full of classical French architecture and deep saturated reds.
The public part of Gusteau's, the facade and the dining room are really designed to make it look like the greatest French restaurant on earth.
And on the other, the kitchen.
Contrasting that is the kitchen, which is all white tile and cast iron stoves and brass and copper.
Good morning.
It's also a very neutral environment, which allowed the vibrancy of the food to feel more potent and draw your attention to it and the people cooking it rather than the room itself.
Oh, the cooks, are we?
We?
We.
So we have two very different environments, but they have one very specific thing in common. They're both warm. And this wasn't done by accident. The warmth not only helps the food to appear more appetizing, but also symbolizes Remy's desires. During the film, rats are shown to live in colder areas, highlighted by muted cool colors. But the human world is highlighted by warm colors. The lighting department even used soft yellow Omni lights to give it a warm glow. And this warm glow is only turned off when Remy betrays Linguini and brings all the rats into the human world for the first time.
The sous is responsible for the kitchen when the chef's not around.
The kitchen is where the majority of the film takes place, and while the lighting was crucial to the film, so too was nailing the look of the set piece and acquiring the perfect level of detail.
I really feel that it's a working kitchen, and how we got there is to do a lot of hand-painted texture maps. They're like newer pots, they're older pots, see scratches, dings. You see the machining from the tin inside, and there's two different surfaces.
But unlike the food, it wasn't a matter of simply getting the kitchen to look real, it had to feel real. And that meant the chefs and their movements had to be realistic.
We had to really learn how a kitchen runs and operates, what the language is.
I'll make this easy to remember. Keep your station clear, or I will kill you!
It's like a ballet, there's a choreography that happens there naturally.
And all these elements combined to give the setting a certain level of authenticity.
You know, it really looks like it is a French restaurant, the way it's set up and the way they're cooking, and in the copper pans, it looks like a French restaurant to me.
So you take a studio with a history of breaking the mold, a director who's a master of storytelling, and a pinch of a world-renowned chef, and you have a recipe for an all-time classic.
Are you sure you want to serve this to Ego?
The groundbreaking advancements in food that Ratatouille achieved served not just itself, but every film they made going forward. They had to completely reinvent their software and spend months in prep time. But through the genius of Sharon Callahan and the dedication of the animation department, Pixar created not only one of their best films, but my personal favorite.
Not everyone can become a great artist.
I'm Luke.
But a great artist can come from anywhere.
Thanks for watching.